This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Wednesday. How's everybody doing today? All right, precious metals. Shall we talk a little precious metals? We've been pulling up the chart now for, I don't know, it's been the last week. Today, where I sit, price of gold, Canadian dollars, $57.87. A year ago, $37.61. There you go. There's the last year on gold. And silver, why not? Silver, why not? It dropped a bit. It's down to $68.05. A year ago, at this time, it was $46.74. So, if you're interested in getting some precious metals, go down in the show notes. Get in contact with Graham. You can text or email him, and you can ask him all the questions around buying, selling, storing, or using your retirement accounts to invest in precious metals. Silvergoldbull.ca or .com. Just make sure to reference the Sean Newman Podcast. Bow Valley Credit Union. Buying and selling Bitcoin has never been easier. Bow Valley Credit Union has developed the first in Canada Bitcoin gateway. With just a few clicks, you can buy Bitcoin directly from your Bow Valley Credit Union account. The Bitcoin you purchase through the Bitcoin gateway is truly yours, is real, securely stored, insured, and never leveraged. Custody is provided to you with no risk of losing seed phrases, complicated technology, or fear of hackers. Just head to bowvalleycu.com for more information. Diamond 7 Meats. Diamond 7 Meats is a Lloydminster family-run business with over 26 years of service, offering more than just retail cuts. They provide livestock processing for farmers and ranchers in Saskatchewan and Alberta, including custom sausage making for both domestic and wild game. If you don't have your own animals, their retail sales connects you directly with the producers, offering you sides or quarters of beef, pork, and lamb. Their experienced staff can help you fill your freezer with exactly what you need, and you can find them on the north end of town, Highway 17 and 67th Street North. Call Diamond 7 Meats today, 306-825-9718. Caleb Taves, Renegade Acres. When it comes to the community spotlight, Caleb Taves and Renegade Acres have graciously used their spot to showcase a few events coming this way. Well, Saturday, October 25th, Prophet River has their Customer Appreciation Day. Rod Giltaka will be in attendance. October 26th, so this Sunday, we're going to be shooting guns with Rod Giltaka, Chuck Prodnick, and Jamie Sinclair at the Lloydminster and District Fish and Game Association Indoor Range. Prophet River supplying the ammo for that. That's 1 to 4:30. Text me. Need to be on a list. It's $20. No, you do not need to have your PAL. No, you do not need to have any guns, anything. You can just show up. No worries. It's professionally. It's going to be a professional event, meaning you don't have to worry about safety and all that good stuff. We got the professionals there to make sure it's done properly. But that should be a fun day. And if you're interested, just shoot me a text, and I'll share the details with you, or more of the details, I guess. Quick Dick McDick Live, November 22nd in Lashburn. That's a fundraiser for the Lashburn Elementary School Playground. And you can get tickets at showpass.com/Lashburn. Spit it out, Sean. The SMP Christmas party is December 20th. We got the dueling pianos back by popular demand. We got one table left. That one table still remains. I'm looking for someone. If you're interested, shoot me a text. The Mash Bill, January 17th in Kalmar, just west of Leduc. You know, it's funny, I still have east of Leduc written down on my sheet. It's west of Leduc, west of the Edmonton International Airport. We're under 14 teams left available for that. If you're interested, shoot me a text. It's also, the link is down in the show notes, but I can fill in some blanks for you if you're interested. If you're listening or watching, no, that's not true. We have one other thing to get to. March 28th, Cornerstone Forum returns. And the latest guest to say yes is Chad Prather. You may remember him. He was just on the podcast, a Texan comedian. He's got his own podcast. He's going to be coming up to Lloydminster, to Calgary for the Cornerstone Forum 2026, which is March 27th, 28th, 29th. The big day is March 28th. The 27th, we have our Cornerstone Social is going to be going on. It's free to attend if you're attending the forum, and it's going to be all at the Westin Calgary Airport Hotel. All the details down in the show notes, and look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of you show up there. That's going to be a fun day. So Chad Prather getting he's the latest to confirm, along with Tom Luongo, Alex Kreiner, Vince Lanchi, Tom Bodrovics, Matt Errett. and 222 minutes. So the guest list slowly, or the keynote speaker list slowly starting to unfold. And it's going to be a lot of fun that day. And I look forward to hopefully, once again, seeing all you fine people there, March 28th. Now, if you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to share with a friend. And if you're so compelled, text me. Love hearing from you guys and catching up on your thoughts on the latest, greatest on the SMP. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. Today's guest is an author and sovereignty coach. I'm talking about Rick Burley. So buckle up. Here we go. Well, welcome to the Shawn Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Rick Burley. Sir, thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shawn. It was great meeting you back at Cornerstone Forum in May. I've been following along and watching some of the interesting guests that you've had on, some of the people who are actually way more in this world that's crazy and insane. They are some special people you've had on, and I don't know what I'm doing here, but thanks for having me.
Well, I tell you what, this gets put together by a friend, a mutual friend, Morley. I was saying to you before we started, I think very highly of Morley, and he was like, "You gotta talk to this guy." I'm like, "Okay, that's simple. That's a simple thing we can do." My only apology is that we couldn't do it in person. You know, you were in the area, and I don't know what I was thinking when I put it in my calendar. In my brain, I think I thought, "Oh, I'll be back early enough. We could do it," and then I didn't put on the kids' schedule on top of that, and I'm like, what am I doing? There's no way I'm pulling this off. So I'm glad we get to do it virtually, and a shout out to Morley for the suggestion. I trust Morley's judgment. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm sure from there we'll have plenty to talk about.
All right. Well, I graduated from law school in Edmonton in '76, did some articling for 2 years. And when I got the invitation to be called to the bar, I got a package to study, and some of the documentation in there kind of blew me away. So I asked the senior partner about it, and he just said, basically, look the other way, shut up, sign the papers, just get on with life. You're going to be a rich man. And that was not a good answer for me. And so I decided to take a couple of weeks off from that, and that was 1978. And I went to look at what the other brotherhood of corruption is in this country, which is the Edmonton Police. And so I got accepted into that and did some boot camps, and just about a year into it, gosh darn, my constable that I was with, he got shot. And when we had our big meeting about the whole incident, I decided, along with the internal affairs people, that this was not for me. And at the time, I was a young Christian in a Baptist church in Edmonton, and the youth pastor suggested since I played music and had hair at the time, he said, "Why don't you come up to do music for us at the Mission Church in Fort McMurray?" And when we got up there, I was doing the music, and one of the people in the congregation was a fellow by the name of Ken Saunders. And Ken Saunders ran the Syncrude project up in Mildred Lake for the Warehouse 41A. And so because of my background with the legal system and with the cops with my security clearance, I was able to be put onto a detail where we looked for all the theft that was happening from the trucks that came out of the Edmonton Municipal Airport at the time when it was still open. And because City Services and Bechtel were getting ready to switch over Syncrude to Bechtel was getting ready to switch it over to Syncrude, there was a lot of theft going on. So we ended up doing that, and we went, as our team grew, we had 8 people on the team. The lead guy was a fellow by the name of Dolph Schumacher, who's still a very good dear friend of mine. And he's living out on Texcata Island there, just out on the Gold Coast in Vancouver area, Vancouver Island. And he's a big, tall Dutchman, and he went in and said to Ken Saunders, "We do not want a paycheck anymore." And Ken Saunders said, why? He said, well, because with all the money we're saving you, we want to cut a different deal, so we don't want to get paid anymore. And if you don't sign this deal, then we walk. And so what the actual contractual agreement was is that we would take 33% of everything we saved the company. And so approximately 18, 19 months later, we all walked out of there, all 8 of us, with about $4.5 million. And that was in 1980 when money was meant something. So at that time, everybody disbanded, everybody went different directions. And I got a call from my mother, because I was in Ontario at the time. And she said, there's a letter here for you from the Canadian government. And so I had her send it off to me. And it was a letter from Al Dove at Purchasing Region on 103rd and 103rd in Edmonton, just 1 block south of the bay and right beside where the YWCA is. And that office was the purchasing area for the Western region. And I ended up getting an interview and they hired me on the spot. The next thing I know, I'm living in Dallas, Texas, moving all of the computers for the Canadian government from the big mainframes and the magnetic tape, which had just gone through a huge transition the year before. But because of all the stuff that was going on with miniaturization in the computer field, they were getting away from mainframes and going to those smaller IBM 360 towers. And so I stayed there. I had a 4-year contract. I got the job done in 4 months. I had everything set up. Everything was going smoothly. Everybody was in the proper place. And I called up Al Dove and I said, Al, I'm coming home. He said, no, you're not. I said, everything's running smoothly. I don't want to be here. I want to come home. I want to come back to work there. He says, no, you have a 4-year contract. And I said, well, I'm not going to live in a hotel and take taxis everywhere for the next, 3.5 years. And he said, listen, son, you've got the company credit card. The little black Infinity Visa. So the next morning I went down and got myself a brand spanking new Chevy Berlinette, brand spanking new bright yellow Camaro, and I got myself an apartment because back then they didn't have condos. So I had another phone call from my mama, and she says, Ricky, your buddy Bruce, he's over in the seminary in Fort Worth. So having nothing else to do, I trundled off in my bright yellow Berlinetta Camaro and visited him at the seminary, Fort Worth Seminary, Southwestern Baptist Theological. They called it Heaven on the Hill, which is bumped up right against Carswell Air Force Base, and the river was behind us. And up on the cliff was a little tiny town called Azle, Texas. And so I started auditing some classes. I was very intrigued. After all, I was a Christian anyway. And here I am now at seminary with nothing to do but learn. And so I decided, well, you know what? I like this the campus life and everything else. It was great. So the professors one day came to me and they said, listen, you got to stop answering all the questions right, because the rest of the students need a chance to answer. And who are you? So we got together and they looked at my curriculum vitae. They looked at my experience, some of the things I'd done. They said, look, why don't we just go ahead and put you into a doctorate program? And I did a doctorate in biblical languages, studied the ancient Sumerian cuneiform. That's the little clay tablets where they press the triangular stick into it from the Anunnaki and the Sumerian culture. Mesopotamia, studied all that. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and something called the Tetragrammaton. And the Tetragrammaton is basically 2 words in Old Hebrew, which basically means the 4 pillars of Yahweh, YWYH. And so I did my dissertation and did everything from the end of Christ's ministry until Paul the Apostle in Acts chapter 8. And the when I defended my paper, they didn't quite like the opinion I had taken on it. And so I didn't get a church, but I really wanted to be an evangelist.
What opinion did you take?
Well, I took the opinion that Yeshua talked about so many important things, and yet here's Paul the Apostle taking up talking about the first Adam and the second Adam. And the first Adam taking all the sin into his life, which, is the story of the Garden of Eden in Genesis. And Yeshua being, Christ himself, he didn't talk about that at all. And so every single time that you see Paul the Apostle, and remember, Paul was Saul of Tarsus. He was a Roman citizen. And so he said, this is not a gospel I got from God or Jesus. This is my gospel to you. And so I was very intrigued with the Aramaic terms and the Greek wording. So I learned to parse Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. And in that dissertation, I proved my point several times over, but they didn't appreciate it. So I didn't get a church. However, I ended up getting invited to talk in front of churches, Baptist churches, Southern Baptist churches, all over the place in that area. And of course, I was not a public speaker. And one of the fellows in one of the churches, Grace Mission in Arlington, Texas, which is kind of in between Dallas and Fort Worth, he said, I work sometimes for a guy by the name of Hillary. Why don't you come and meet him? He's hiring some young men. So we went out to the ranch that Sunday afternoon after church, and there was this group of young men from the churches in the area, and out comes this big 6'4" bear of a man with big curly hair and big square rimmed glasses, and he sticks out this giant bear paw of a hand. He goes, "Hi, my name is Hillary, but you can call me Zig." And I got hired by the Ziglar organization, and for the next 10 years, I was part of the front team with Tony Robbins and Bill Cantrell, Stuart McKellen, Peter Lowe, who's still an active evangelist and speaker in Florida, good friend of mine. And just one thing after the other, I got the bug, and I learned how to orate, which is an interesting word because the word corporation...
Is it possible you have one of the most interesting lives ever? Like,
no.
I'm like, what? If I got this right, Rick, and we haven't even got to where you're at today, in 1976, you should have been a lawyer. But you read through it.
My specialty was international law, doing import and export. I wanted to travel the world, writing briefs and doing case studies and helping businesses with international business, which is because everything I found out was run by the Roman Catholic Church. That when they say all roads lead to Rome, they're not kidding.
If I may then. So in 1976, instead of just glazing over the fine print, signing on, and becoming a lawyer, you are one of those fine folks who reads the fine print and goes, I don't like what this says. Then you go to your superior or your higher up or whatever.
Senior partner.
Thank you. And they go, yeah, don't worry about it. Everybody just signs on to it. It's not a big deal. And you go, yeah, I don't like that answer, which is unusual for a young man as well, I might add. And so you instead of becoming a lawyer, you walk away from it after how many years? Was that 4 years at that time? 2 years? 6. Okay, so from 1970 to 1976, you are about to become a lawyer, and you go, yeah, I'm not doing that. So then you walk away from it entirely. You walk over to the Edmonton Police Service, and you become a cop. And how many years is that?
Just a tad over 1 year.
Okay, so
I hadn't even graduated yet, and my ride-along constable gets shot.
So from 1978 to 79, am I fair in saying that?
Mm-hmm.
And when you say he got shot, like this is on the job, you're there, or so you're...
Yeah, because part of the training when you're doing the ride-alongs before you graduate, you don't get a gun. All you got is your billy stick and your handcuffs and your uniform.
And so while you're on a ride-along with him, he gets shot.
The federal building, just on Jasper Avenue, across from the convention center, where Jasper Avenue curls around and goes north to 97th Street. That's where the federal building is. They got a call, so we went out there to see what was going on, and he got popped then, back alley. I was supposed to run down the back alley, but he said, Burley, go to the front, call it in. So I did, and the other 2 squad cars show up, and when they jump out and they say, where is everybody? And I say, well, everybody went down to the alley. And so that's when we heard the gunshots.
And did he die?
No, paraplegic.
Whew. Okay. So from 78, 79, you're a cop. Then a guy on a ride along as you're training gets shot. You're like, oh, this isn't for me.
Yep.
So then you go to, if I understood correctly, you get hired because I'm assuming they're like, wait a second. So you're basically a lawyer. You have the cop background. So Syncrude, I think it was Syncrude, hires you and another group of 8 guys to cut down on, they're losing money, they can see it, and they go, well, we gotta get some guys in here who can figure this out. You figure it out, and not only do you figure it out, you're saving them so much money. The head guy is like, listen, we're not going to do this anymore for peanuts. We want 33% of whatever we save you, which equates to over $4 million a person back in 1980. Then you go down to Texas, and this is, forgive me, I don't know if I missed it, but you go down to Texas, and you're moving government infrastructure from Texas to Canada?
Right. So they have a great big building on LBJ Freeway north out of Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
And that big building, giant, great big white building, I think it was 11 or 12 stories, and it was called the Infomart. And that's where every single computer company back in the day had offices. So that's where we were located. And I was working for the Canadian government at the time on a 4-year contract to do this transition from the mainframe computers to the IBM 360 mini towers.
Can I just ask a really dumb question? Maybe, why would our government store its information in a different country?
Still happens today.
All the things, national security, et cetera, you're telling me, like, if the U.S. just rolled up, probably just FBI, I mean, they could just seize it all. Could they not? I don't even know if they'd need to do that. But, I mean, like, if it's sitting there, what's stopping that from happening?
Not a darn thing. And keep in mind that Canada is run under the Edgar search engine with a CIK number under the Securities and Exchange Commission, acting as the Canadian government. An Edgar search engine stands for Electronic Data Gathering and Retrieval, and the CIK number stands for Central Index Key. So every single corporation in the world has one of those numbers. So you can search it up on the Securities and Exchange Commission, just plug in 0000980023, and up pops this subsidiary of the United States District of Columbia Incorporated company acting or doing business as an alias Canadian government. It's no wonder that Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, who was installed, by the way, there was no election. John A. Macdonald was installed in the same way that Marxist carnage was installed. Mark Carney.
I've heard Marx Carney. Marxist carnage. That's a good one. Okay. Sorry, back on track here, Sean.
So
my
we're
brain
we're at Infomart, Dallas, Texas, doing the transition of getting now keep in mind, this was not necessarily data storage. This was the actual physical hardware and making sure everything ran smoothly with the new computer systems of the IBM 360 mini towers, because they were having a terrible time with physically moving equipment from the States to Ottawa and Winnipeg. And so I would end up doing this job where they would fly us to the Maritimes. They'd fly us out to the Queen Charlottes. They'd send us up north. We'd go to Vancouver, then Winnipeg. We'd go back out to, Moncton. We'd go to, every place hither and yon. And we had to have all this installed. And I said, well, I enjoy travel, but you know what? It gets to be a bore after a while. And so I started to hire Canadians to run out of that office so they could go and do those installs. But we had to make sure all of the information and the data sourcing and the transmission of that Because don't forget, back then they just had the little cups where you plug the phone in, right? With the little squawk box. So it was miserable, but I got it done.
How many years are you down in Texas? I'm just trying to follow your timeline. So
4.
So what years are those?
That would be 1980, and that's when I was down there. I was supposed to be down there for 4 years.
But along the way, you have a friend at seminary. You start going there because you have free time, I assume, and you're like, you know what? I'm a Christian. I'd like to go learn some things. So you go there, and not only do you learn some things, you're telling me you start studying the most ancient of ancient languages so you can actually, I don't know, go back to the original.
Understand the source material.
Right. Thank you. You stole the words from me. So you can get right to the source material. How many years?
That's what they taught us to do in law school. You see, because lawyers don't know the law. They know procedure. And so that's why they have their articling students do all the heavy lifting for them in that 2 years of making sure the students know how to do the research and know where to go and find the evidence and the facts and the data so they can point to the information and make the lawyer look smart. But it's all the articling students. Trust me, they are the ones that do the actual work.
So if you you're in Texas from 1980 to 1984. In those 4 years, this is while you're at seminary as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that's when I ended up getting hired,
by Ziglar.
By the Ziglar organization, yeah. And we became part of that group of young men that went up and down the eastern seaboard setting up peak performance rallies of the 80s for Zig. So we got to meet people like Art Linkletter and Norman Vincent Peale and Paul Harvey and, Charlie Tremendous Jones, you name it. We got to meet him because we were the ones hosting those rallies, those big things. And he'd have 4,000 and 5,000 people at a time. And we would then be responsible for going and talking to the Mary Kay ladies, the ones that drive the pink Cadillacs. And they were the ones that would sit at the back of the room and sell the books and the tapes for whoever Zig had on stage with him. And so we would set all that up. We'd do the VIP breakfast in the morning, and we would then do the show later on. Then we'd break everything down, made sure everybody was putting all the equipment back. And because I had, from my time at Fort McMurray, we had checklists for everything to make sure everybody got the microphones and the stands and the speakers and all the cabling. And I had it down lickety-split to make sure that everything got put away the way it was supposed to, so that we'd know how to put it up the next show. Then moved to Cincinnati.
You are imparting on me how detail orientated you are. Am I wrong on that? Like, to me, you must be a guy that doesn't skip by a single line in anything. So,
I'm sure it happens. I missed my wife's birthday once, so.
All the names you said in there, and I know several of them. There's some that I'm like, I have no idea who that is. And I'm sure if I were to go look into them, I'd be like, oh. But you also mentioned Tony Robbins, which I think most people today know exactly who that is. Okay. So how many years do you do that?
10.
So from 1984 to 1994, am I right in that time frame?
So keep in mind, the contract for the Canadian government was 4 years, but I ended up getting hired by the Ziglar Corporation in 82.
So from 82 to 92, you're with Ziglar.
Well, not quite. 91. So we moved the family back in the spring of 91 to Edmonton.
Okay. Sorry. I'm just trying to keep my brain. You're rattling off a ton of stuff right now. So you're running around.
Well, hang on. Let me tell you why we ended up going back to Canada. So my buddy Bill Cantrell and I ended up sort of being the more visual front men. And so people would always come to us and say, hey, I'm here again, because we'd go to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Cincinnati. We'd end up in Philadelphia, and we'd have all these people, groupies, who were like junkies to go to these motivational seminars. And we'd see Bob and Tom and Ted and Dick and Alice and Mary Sue, and we'd like, well, weren't you just here like a month ago? And you were over there in Boston, weren't you? Didn't we see you there? We saw you in Chicago, right? And they'd go, yeah, but it's like a bath. I need more. I need more motivation. And so we began to understand that motivation is not something you impart. Motivation is something you help people discover within themselves that already exists. And so we started this pick your success consulting business within Zig Ziglar's organization. And so in '89, we developed an entire raft of materials in order to help these people understand in that moment that what they're stubbing their toe on in their business or their family life or their spiritual life was not the thing that they thought it was, because they had it all stuck up here in their head. They never got it written down on paper. So I wrote an article saying, if you don't write it down, you'll never get it right. And we started to talk to people about where exactly the problem was and getting them to describe it. Because it's not our job to tell them how to live their life or build their agenda or plan their futures. What our job is of consultants or mentors was to offer them back choices, options, and alternatives for the changes they want to make. So if you circle the letters of all those words, choices, C, options, O, alternatives, A, for change, CH, spells the word coach. And that's what a coach actually is supposed to do. He's supposed to listen in between the lines for that material that comes out from the person they're listening to, and get that person to regurgitate it in a way that person goes, wait a minute, because oftentimes this would happen. Wait a minute, repeat what you just said. Well, what did I say? Well, what do you mean you don't remember what you just said? You were talking about this goal or this thing that was going on in your life. And all of a sudden, you don't remember what you just said? You see, that's the problem. And a lot of people go, oh, Rick, you're right. And I say, hold on, say that again and keep your finger there. And they go like, what are you talking about? And I say, well, just hold your finger there, point your finger at me and tell me that again. And they go, you're right. And I say, where did the energy go? And they go, to you. And I said, try this instead. Point it at yourself and say, that's true for me. They say, they do it. And I say, where does the energy go now? And they go, back to me. And I say, then start listening for the truth. Don't speak in the language of right and wrong, of judgment, because everything is verbal alchemy. And that's the problem of the battlefield briefing. We've been so freaking inundated and indoctrinated with the legal system and the church, the Vatican. And this goes all the way back to 1302 with Pope Boniface, when he issued the papal bull called Unum Sanctum, which basically says, I own everything. You want to go to heaven? You got to come through us. Well, you come fast forward a couple of hundred years, you have King Henry VIII wants to divorce his wife in 1540, and he goes to the Pope and says, hey, I need a divorce. I'm getting rid of this one. Pope says, no, you're not. That's not what we do. And he goes, okay, fine. I'll set up my own church. So he splits away because he's protesting. And they called that movement the protesters, which we westernized today called the Protestants. And so he set up a testamentary trust and said, I'm going to administer everything for everybody from my crown. Now remember, Sean, they don't crown a dead guy. To be sovereign, you have to be alive. So it's 2025. Where's your sovereignty? Well, it's you, the living soul. So the question becomes, based on everything going on in Alberta right now, can Alberta ever be sovereign? Because remember, they don't crown dead people. So the answer is a resounding no. You cannot have Alberta be sovereign. Why not? Because Alberta is not alive. However, if all the sovereigns, if all the people of sui juris, which is an interesting word, jurisdiction, juris of my own authority over me, and diction, the words I use. Well, and don't forget, the legal industry is the only industry on this plane of existence we're on in this realm that has its own dictionary. And every single word is different. So they have indoctrinated us into their word magic, their verbal alchemy. And it just goes so deep, and it's frustrating because, nobody, I mean, you hear about people, well, how do you spell your name, Sean? Is it Sean? No. Sean, how do you spell your name?
Shaun.
Right, but there's the key, right? It's how do you spell? And we don't teach kids we're teaching them to print or do keyboard, but we don't teach them what we call the longhand. What do you call it? You know, the technical term for writing in script? It's called cursive. The curse of the spell. Everything is this hidden, deep verbal alchemy. And when you are a lawyer and you start to understand it, this is one of the reasons why that secret, solemn, sworn oath is superior to every other public oath. And that's what I took exception to back in 78. Because I did not want to be a part of that brotherhood that had a secret, solemn, sworn, superior oath. And by the way, you can find that in the presumptions under Canon 3228 of Roman civic law. Because it says it right there. And those 12 presumptions, they still exist today. So if you don't rebut the presumption, you're already guilty. And see, we don't get taught. We don't teach people anything about the law. We don't teach them about the procedures. And so what ends up happening is you end up with people, and, the guy who goes to court to represent himself oftentimes find himself in deeper trouble simply because he doesn't know the law. And that's why they have to, get representation from somebody else. And, the guy says, well, I didn't know that about the law. And the judge says, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse not to know the law. So it's a vicious circle, a cycle that it keeps us as indentured debt slaves. And that's the work of the battlefield briefing, because there is a reckoning coming, and it's no longer a light at the end of the tunnel, Sean. It's now coming out of that tunnel, and it's right here. And if you haven't noticed, the economy and the culture that we're in, and by the way, there's a reason why they call it a culture. Because we are indoctrinated into their system, and they do not want us creating that movement. I mean, look what happened when Tamara Leach and Chris Barber did their thing with the truckers and ended up in the hot water they're at. Remember, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and the powers of the dark forces of government of the air. And that's an interesting thing, because what's going on right now around the world? Aren't there a whole lot of people trying to bomb each other and shoot each other and kill? Well, the powers that be have done a very good job of focusing our attention and getting us distracted with bread and circuses, so that's all we are doing is fighting flesh and blood. Because if we ever calm down and create calm unity, CALMUNITY, then we will create a movement of sovereigns to create a de jure governance that serves the people instead of the de facto government we have right now, which makes us serve them. But anyway, I'm sorry about the soapbox.
I'm you have my brain firing on, I don't know if it's all cylinders, but it's definitely, I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, what do I ask this man, folks? I'm like, okay, I hear ya. That was a lot. You might be the most interesting man on the planet with just essentially 14 years of your life. You've done, no, 21 years of what you've given me. I'm like, okay, that's a lot. I wrote 3 stars here, and I don't mean to pull us off the verbal alchemy right off the hop, but I feel like I got plenty of time here today to sit in this conversation and like dig into some things. So you said motivation is not something you impart. I find that very interesting. I'm not exactly sure why I find that interesting, but I'm like, I wrote it down. I'm like, huh. Because to me, some of the most motivational people on the planet, that's exactly what we'd say is they're imparting their wisdom. But that's not what you said. So I was wondering if you could explain that a bit more.
Sure. And interestingly enough, being a person who was in the motivational industry, that's kind of a strange thing to hear, right? Well, I can't motivate you, but the focal point is that you're already motivated. However, because you're not listening to the self, you're not listening to that inner voice, you get distracted by everything else, shiny thing, squirrel, and then it ends up taking you off that focus. One of my mentors was a gentleman that ran a gigantic multi-level marketing company called Herbalife out of California. And whenever he would go on tour or do a seminar, he'd always come back to Zig's house and stay with Zig whenever he was in Texas. And so as we went out in our team to do what our thing, the advance team, every Monday morning we would have flown back in on a Sunday night. We'd come back to the office at Zig's ranch. Do you remember the TV show Dallas by any chance?
Yep.
You remember that opening shot where that comes off the highway and that car goes down that long road to the low-rise building, the little bungalow,
yes,
great big bungalow, the Ewing Ranch. That was like Zig's house. Great big empty fields and plains and a great big long driveway. And then you get to the house and back in around it was this luscious, great pool and beautiful trees. And it was awesome. So we would get there and we'd go at lunch and we'd eat, barbecue and Dr. Pepper, and we'd be sitting there doing our paperwork because, you had the machines like, will that be cash or chargex? And we'd sort out all the checks and all of the credit card receipts, and we'd submit our invoice to be paid. And after lunch, if Jim's buddy was there, we'd get to sit at the feet of Jim Rohn and be mentored and talked to, and he'd tell us all the wonderful things. And you talk to anybody who's in the motivational industry, Jim Rohn was like the grandpappy of them all, and I got to sit at his feet and learn. So, I had no idea really what I was getting back then. And when you're a young person, you don't have any context. And so jump fast forward to the idea that I can't motivate anybody. But if I listen to the context of what they're saying, I can ask deep probing questions and I can go deep fast, because those questions, the statements they're saying, I can then turn around and ask them a question about it. And that's where they stumble, because they get off track in their own mind. And my job was to bring, or in my understanding of working with human communication, was to bring them back to the focal point of the problem. And in that moment, they have this revelation and the scales fall off their eyes. They have that light bulb. So I call it, you probably heard it before, the aha moment or the eureka moment. And I'll tell you a real quick story here. So one time a guy came into my office. This is back when I was in Edmonton. And he says, everything's crashing around me. He said, I can't make payroll. I don't know what to do. And one of my guys was at one of your seminars. He says I should come see you. So I'm here. Go ahead. Heal me. Fix me. And I said, well, first of all, let's just call this guy Bob. I said, first of all, Bob, I can't fix you because you're not broken. The problem resides in the story you're telling yourself. So let me hear you explain that story again. And I want you to write down some notes. Because, when somebody writes down and gets it out of their head on paper, and you can actually see what you've written, all of a sudden you go, well, wait a minute, that's not what I meant. I have to, and they stroke it out and they start again. So this guy tells me the stuff, he's writing some notes, and he tells me, look, the job that I was doing, we worked only with Fortune 500 companies. And I went to my boss and I said, look, we could double or triple our productivity and our revenue if we go and talk to the less fortunate 2,000 companies. And he said, my boss said, absolutely not. We're not doing that. You stick with your guns. And he said, well, we were making great money, and I talked to the rest of the team, and they all agreed with me. We should be talking to the less fortunate 2,000. And so me and the rest of the guys, we all left. And we set up our own business. And for the next 2 years, we were working with the less fortunate 2,000. Well, guess what happened, Rick? We became part of the less fortunate 2,000. We were losing money hand over fist. We couldn't seem to make payroll. And now this is the third month in a row. What am I doing wrong? And I said, well, before we talk about what's wrong, tell me what you did right when you were working with the Fortune 500 companies. And he tells me that story. And I said, let me make sure I got this right. You're telling me you were making money hand over fist. Everybody was happy. Your clients were happy. You guys were happy. The company was happy. You were working with the Fortune 500 companies. And you left that to work with the less fortunate 2,000 companies. And now you're going broke and you can't make payroll. And kind of sheepishly with, well, yeah, I guess you could say it that way. I said, well, that's exactly what it sounds like. That's true, correct? And he goes, yeah. I said, okay, I tell you what. Make a commitment to come back and see me in a month, and I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. Here's what you do. You go back to all of those Fortune 500 companies and you tell them, we'd really like to give you a second opinion on that quote you're getting from the old company. And he goes, well, it can't be that simple. I said, okay, it can't be that simple. He goes, you're agreeing with me? I said, well, if you are bound and determined to blow yourself up and sabotage your own success, then sure, I'll agree with you. He says, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Tell me again. I said, go back to the existing Fortune 500 companies that already know you, know your work, and tell them you and your guys would like to give them a second opinion on that quote. Well, he didn't show up again in the end of the month. He didn't keep his commitment. He didn't come back at the end of the second month. He didn't keep his commitment to come back at all. And 4 months later, guess who knocks on my door? Well, here it is. It's Bob. I say, Bob, good to see you. You didn't keep your word. It's been 4 months. What's going on? And he slides this envelope across to me. And he says, here, go open this. And I said, no, whoa, I'm not opening that. You open it. What is it? He goes, no, it's a surprise. Go ahead, open it. I said, no, you open it. So he opens it in front of me, and it's filled with cash. $8,000 worth of cash. And I said, what's this for? And he goes, I wanted to come back and thank you. He says, you kicked my ass really good. And I hated you for it for a couple of days. And one of the guys said, did you ever go and see that guy, Rick? And he says, yeah. And he says, well, what did he tell you to do? He said, go and tell the existing companies of Fortune 500 that already know us and know our work, and tell them we'd like to give them a second opinion. And the guy goes, well, that's freaking genius. Let's go do that. We can't make payroll. What do we got to lose? So they went and did it. They were so freaking busy for that 4-month period of time, making money hand over fist, that they couldn't come back and see me. You see, I can't motivate a guy. But if I listen to the context of his story, if I listen to the laundry list of wrongs, if I hear the litany of ills that guy has, oftentimes I can offer him a choice or an option or an alternative that he'd never considered before in order to make the change that he says he wants. And here's the thing. If you say you want to make a change because of something, and you don't measure or test your results to see if you are making progress or if you're stagnant or if you're moving backwards, then what are you doing? Are you just paying lip service to the fact that you're blowing yourself up? What are you going to do? Go and self-medicate with drugs and alcohol and prostitution and gambling and continue to ruin your life? Or do you suck it up and do you start to look around and start listening to the voice and ask for help? There's no shame in that. And so that's the idea of motivation, because people, Sean, are already motivated. We just need to listen and encourage them to listen to themselves at that moment, in that context. Did that help?
Yeah. Well, I think of when I left the oil field and started doing this, and I couldn't figure out why I was unhappy working a very good job, being very successful. You hear this out of a lot of people that work in corporate jobs that are making good money, benefits, time off, success, right? All these things, but something's missing and you can't figure out what that something is, right? And one of the things I remember thinking when I was talking to a career coach about it was how I couldn't figure out what they were doing, because they actually weren't doing, in my opinion, they weren't doing much, but they were doing exactly what you were just saying. They were giving me space to talk it out, and then they just asked a question. I was like, no, that's not what I meant. And then I have to go write about it, and it really helped me figure out actually what I wanted.
Exactly.
And then I guess what you're pointing out to is like, you can't solve my problem. I have to solve it. And that is in itself confidence. You're building your own confidence to go solve your problems. And you already have the answers. You just don't give yourself time to figure it out, or even the confidence that you have the confidence, if that is a sentence and a thought, to go figure it out. And one of the things of leaving the oil field and going and doing this, everybody's like, you're going to do what? You're insane. I'm like, I don't think so. Didn't do this overnight. I took like 3 or 4 years to really think this out. I think I'm in a decent position. If it falls, I'll go back and grab a job now. I feel like I got no problem. I can go find a job tomorrow. And it's funny. Now I sit 3.5 years past that. I've never looked back, and I'm glad I've never looked back. But it wasn't like I just jumped in with no plan. Because of what you're talking about, I went back and really built it out. And I thought it would take 5 years. It took 3 years. I was pretty gentle on myself, or whatever. I was like, if I keep at this way for 5 years, I'll be there. And it took 3. It's funny, when you started orientating your ship in the right direction, how quickly things happen. So it actually, when you piece out that story, that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah. What's the second star, Sean?
The second star, I think, covered in the first. So I'll go to the third star. And I actually have 4 stars now. The third star is source material. One of the things that I think myself and others have been searching for a while is the truth. And then what happens is, well, so you went to the Bible, but what Bible did you actually read? Like did you read the one where they're putting words in, taking words out? All these different things. And when you talk about studying the original text, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I guess I'm curious. You start reading the source material. What did you find?
How much time do you have?
Well, that's why I looked at the time. I looked at my calendar. I'm like, I got plenty of time. I'm like, as long as you got time, I got all the time in the world right now. So I go, I'm not rushing this. I'm if you got to rush, we can always set up a second one. But you just told me a crazy amount of information on your career. I'm like, okay. And then you're telling me you learned, and I can't remember, is it Aramaic and some other ones that I'm like, oh, I've heard of these things. And people talk about wanting to do that, but then they work full time, and I'm like, so how do you ever get that? Now I run into you and I'm like, okay, what did you find when you went to the source material? I got the time.
So it's interesting. The source material has been corrupted over centuries. And the evidence of that has you've probably heard about this, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were a revelation, and there's a lot in them that we have not been able to identify and make sense of until the deep mind of AI was given the source material and to look for patterns. And one of the things that jumped out was the source material of some of the oldest manuscripts that we have. For example, Jesus, by the way, his name was never Jesus. It was Yeshua. And he spoke Aramaic. That language is what the disciples originally wrote in. So when you consider like Matthew, the tax collector, Mark, the young man who was a fisherman, Luke, who was a doctor, and John, who was the beloved disciple. These guys, they didn't really know how to write, but they could tell the stories, and those stories were told over and over orally. It was a spoken word. And it wasn't until years and decades later, actually 70 AD, that John, the beloved, actually ended up on Patmos Island, which then God appeared to him and said, you need to write this down. And that was the actual first written manuscript. The oldest that we have is John on Patmos Island writing down the Revelation, which is the last book in the New Testament. And when you strip away all of the silliness out of the scriptures and all of the mythology and the legend and the stories that people tell, and you actually get into the source material, you find that it's not quite what you thought it was. And it becomes quite revealing because, for example, Yeshua talked about the book of Enoch, and he quoted from it regularly. Well, guess what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? They found the book of Enoch, and they found where the source material came from, which was, 600 years old. And don't forget, in terms of the source material, you have an intertestamental period between the last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi, and the first book of the New Testament, which is Matthew. That 400-year period is the intertestamental period. And you have books like the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha, and you have all these other works which talk about the Maccabean revolt against the Romans. And it's that story that sets up what happens when Jesus was born. And keep in mind, and this is another fascinating thing, the idea of a manger. We're coming into Christmas here shortly, and you see the manger. Well, the manger is not a barn. It's not a stable. It's a crude, quickly built lean-to. And it's not actually a permanent structure. It's a wandering structure because it can go anywhere. You just take off the two side slats and you move it over. If there's green grass over there and your cattle have to go over there or your sheep need to move, you just, boom, you got three pieces, boom, you move it over. So it's not permanent. Now, if there had been room in the inn for Joseph and Mary to go to, they would have been under the jurisdiction of the Roman government, because the only reason they went to Bethlehem was to do the census. So when you strip away the whole kind of idea of the story of Christmas, it ain't what it is. And it didn't happen in December. I mean, in 1543, we had the Gregorian calendar, and they changed it to the Julian calendar. We lost 10 days in the calendar. Well, you think that that's the first time, just by accident, that's the first time they've adjusted our calendars? Jesus himself said, we have the stars and the signs in the heavens, and yet you can't read them. And so what has happened is that the satanic and Luciferian philosophy of the world has inundated us, and now what we worship is mammon. Now, out of economic necessity, we have to eat, clothe ourselves, and have a roof over our head. But the scriptures, when you take a look at the source material, it exhorts us always to put the idea of the Spirit of the Lord in front of us. But you can't do that if you are having self-pity and self-doubt and no confidence. You go back and look at the spiritual armor of God, where it talks about, the breastplate and the shodding the feet and the sword of truth. And well, what's on the back, Sean? What's the back of the suit of armor?
I'm drawing a blank right now.
Nothing. Your ass is bare. So if you clothe yourself with the armor of God, you're supposed to go forward because there's nothing for the backside. But here's the thing. Who has your back?
God.
Therefore, if you turn around, you expose yourself to the enemy. And you see, my friend Doug Force, when he did a movie with Xander LaRue and Tim Stein called Canada the Illusion, Doug and I would have some knockdown, drag-out lawyer talk conversations. And every time he goes, I'm stuck, what do I do? And I'd say, oh, okay, well, where are you stuck? How did you get stuck? What path were you in? Where were you doing your structural stuff? And he'd explain where he was and what was going on and how he got to where he was. And I said, well, let's back up a few steps. Did you look here? Did you examine this? Did you go and research that? Have you done your due diligence on this thing? And little by little, because I'm a huge Roger Smith fan. I've studied him way back, and I got introduced to him. I don't even remember now. But he's the guy that gets right at the very front of that documentary movie, Canada the Illusion. It says this, in memory of Roger Smith. And he was brilliant. And because he talked about sovereignty. And by the way, if you you can Google this, Donovan Waters. The book is currently in its 5th edition. It's Waters' Trust Law. And he talks about the irrevocable private contract trust. And what he does is he mentions all the time the Bible, because the Bible, as we know it today, was the first testamentary trust, which is why they call it the Old Testament and the New Testament. The testamentary trust is our key to sovereignty. And when you go to the source material and understand that the sovereignty of the creator of the universe gave man dominion, and that word is sovereignty, control of, authority over. And you see that. And I asked people, like when I was at Morley's house, he had great big giant room full of people. I don't know, 40 odd, 40, 50 people, I can't remember, but massive amount of people, all folk, good folk, salt of the earth, farmers and people who work with their hands and raising families. And they're like, pulling their hair out. What's going on with our country? This ain't the country I grew up in. And I read them the battlefield briefing. And by the way, if anybody ever wants that, please feel free to post it or give it away or show people.
Sure. If anybody wants it,
they can contact you.
Yeah, I was just thinking in my head, do I want them to text me? Because I could do that, but then I'm going to have to add in email me. Email me and I'll just forward it on to you. There you go. That way I can just skip a step.
So people often ask me, because when we're in that moment of context in the room with a bunch of people, they all have questions because they all have a specific circumstance that's very special or significant to them. And you can't just answer everybody's question. And, so we leave it to the end. And of course, I'm sure you saw this happen at Cornerstone when, Martin Armstrong got off or Tom Luongo got off. Man, they were mobbed, right?
Yes.
People want access. Well, when you are doing something and you have the armor of God on, you go forward. The access point is your own spirit. So how do you allow that spirit of God in you? Because where is God? Well, it says that you are the vessel. And the infilling of the spirit is something you have to invite in. Now, remember, our court system today will never invoke equity. You have to do it as the living soul. But they don't treat you as a living soul. Just prior to you starting the show, you looked at your driver's license. In Alberta, the driver's license, the last name of everybody is in all caps, which means complete loss of status. And there are only 2 statuses. There's a creditor status and there's a debtor status. So if you are trying to find your way in the world and you are the debtor, then you are voluntarily consenting to be the dead guy. And there are laws against impersonation. Because you take a look at your birth certificate, you didn't sign that. It was created at the date of your birth. But that's not when life begins. So if they can fool us, if they can commercially create fraud and not tell us, then there's no way out of the matrix. And by the way, in Black's Law Dictionary, which is the dictionary that the legal industry uses, the word matrix means the law. That's the definition of it in their own dictionary. But here's the thing: we're in Morley's room. People came up to me after and they said, "Rick, get me out of the matrix. Get me out of this evil system." And I look at them and I say, "Sorry, Bob, I can't take you out of a system you're not in." And they say, "What are you talking about?" And I say, "Well, the system is set up for dead people. It's just ink on paper. Common law is about the bone and the breath and the blood, the living soul. So if you go to a march or go to a rally, you stand on a street corner, use a bullhorn to try to get your point across or demand your rights, the dead ink on paper system can't hear you. And that's the differentiation between the legal system of ink on paper and the spirit, the living word of God, because that word has to get inside of you. You have to live it. That's the witness. The Aramaic word gospel in Matthew 28 says, "Go ye therefore and preach the gospel," and that word means good news to all the nations, make disciples of all the nations. Okay, well, wait a minute. What are we supposed to say? Well, preach the gospel. And people go, "Oh, well, so which book? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Colossians, Ephesians, Galatians? What do I preach on?" Well, if you take a look at that word in Aramaic, the true parsing of it, when you start to go back to the source, means the good news in your life, not the ink on paper. What happened in your life? I got this beat into me by Jim Rohn, and he's a gentle giant of a man way back in the 80s. And he was just like, you have to live the word. That's what people see. We talk about authorship, AUTH, authorship. And that's when you write something down. Remember what we talked about earlier, where if you write it down and you say, well, that's not right, and you scribble it out and you start again. You were talking about when you went to the career coach and they had you write some stuff down and they asked you questions about it. Well, you're the one doing the work. You have to take your hand and you have to do the writing. And so when you're talking about authorship, anytime you start putting pen to paper and getting the chaos and confusion out of the brain, out of the cerebrum and in the cerebellum, you get it down on paper. Now you can see what you're saying. That's why I exhort people. I say, look, unless you write it down, you'll never get it right.
Jordan Peterson has talked lots about this. He had his what was he called? Self-authoring program. Future. You write down. Basically, I think it was, you write down the future you want, as good as it can get, and then you write down as bad as it can get. And he's like, and everybody can talk about how bad it can get, right? And you use your own writing to motivate you to go after the good, because you know how bad it can get. And I remember listening to Peterson at a very pivotal time in my life, I would say, and being like, that makes so much sense. And once again, you're just reiterating that. So I guess, we've hopped all over the place, or it feels like we have. And you've thrown a ton of different things at me. And so I go, okay, this idea of sovereignty. I'm going to be honest. I haven't loved the word for a while because it's been kind of like everybody's going to become sovereign. But then there's no meat to the word. There's nothing to it. It's like, we're going to be sovereign. Okay, how do you do that? You've just rattled off a bunch of different things where I'm like, okay, maybe Rick can explain to me how people can themselves become sovereign individuals then.
All right, let's start with the question, okay? It's 2025, Sean, where, prepositionally speaking, if I'm holding this up, I'm holding it up in front of the camera. If I do this, the cup is behind the camera. If I do this, it's beside the camera, okay? So prepositionally, where is your sovereignty, Sean?
I don't know. Within me? I mean,
That's right.
I guess,
Because you are a living soul.
yes.
The sovereign of the universe, the divine creator, creates man. And let's ask the question, where did God create man out of? The land, the air, or the water?
The land, the earth.
Which is where we get the idea of common law of the land. And then we get the letter A, which is the divine law of God, because we don't fight against flesh and blood. We fight against the principalities and the powers of the spiritual dark forces of the air. This is a spiritual battle. So it's the divine law of God, air. And the W is the law of water, lex mercatoria, the Roman term for the law of the merchant, admiralty, maritime law. So when we talk about where did God create man, came from the land, not the air, not the water. Now, if you go all the way back to source material, one of the most interesting things I found out was the life of Moses. Everybody, I think, knows the story of Moses, don't you think? I mean, Moses was the guy that led the people out of Egypt, right?
It was the one story, just me parting my, not my wisdom, my thoughts on it. It was the one story when I started reading the Bible that made me realize the dark side has limits, and it was gnats. If you go back to when Moses is doing, turning his staff into a serpent and all these weird things that are happening in there, the magicians get to a point where they can't do what he's doing, and I'm like, gnats? Really? That's what it was? Is gnats? Because they were doing crazy stuff before that. Crazy stuff. And yes, I think most people know the story of Moses, but for me, the thing that stood out the most was the magicians. They had a limit, and I was like, that's kind of odd to me. I don't know why that's odd, but I look at that and I just assumed they could do everything. Because if you get to a limit, if you're sitting there and you're the pharaoh, and all of a sudden your guys can't do what the other side's doing, you would think, you go, okay, I'm missing something here. You would think. Now, of course, that's not how the story plays out, and God was hardening his heart and a whole bunch of things. Carry on.
So the story of Moses begins by the Hebrew mother putting the baby Moses into a basket, right?
Yes.
Now, in Hebrew, his name is not Moses. It's Moshe. M-O-S-H-E. Okay? And that word is a direct reflection of land, air, water, law. The acronym law, land, air, water. Okay? So if we are to follow the leading of the Spirit of God, we have to understand that we are land-based. We are common law land-based under the divine law of God, under the air, the spiritual battle. And God does not go before us. We have to go before God. But that's why there's no protection for the backside, because he's got our back. And so every time you see any character in the Bible doing anything, it's always they've got to do it first in the physical realm. Okay? So those 5 words, it's me, the living soul, that's the answer to the question of where is your sovereignty? It's in you. You have to act it, because they don't crown dead guys. There's never been a king or a queen of England or Denmark or any monarchy anywhere where they have a dead guy on the throne. You can't be sovereign unless you are alive. Okay, so if you're alive, if you have bone and breath and blood in you, you are sovereign. Okay, so God, the creator of the universe, gives dominion or sovereignty to Adam, the first man made from the land. But Adam's looking around. He's going, the birds and the bees, they're doing their thing. And hey, Lord, what about me? Like the pigs and the sheep and the goats didn't work out so well. What about me? So God says, hey, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to put you to sleep. I'll take a rib out of your side. And when you wake up, you're going to be amazed. So God creates a woman, and the original spelling was W-O-M-B-M-A-N, because she's part of mankind, but she has a womb. So she's a womb man. She can create life. She can do what God does, but she can't do it alone. Don't care what Dr. Fauci says. And so here's Adam, here's Eve. They now have children. So sovereign God of the universe gives sovereignty, dominion to Adam. He can't do anything with it till he has his partnership. And that's why she's slightly superior to man. She can create life, but she can't do it alone. She needs that partnership. And that's why the scriptures exhort us, nurture, protect, encourage, uplift your women. And that's why the entire, any other culture in the world, and there's a reason why they call it a culture, every other culture and religion in the world denigrates women. And it's only been in the last 113 years when the Pope and the Catholic Church have relinquished and allowed women to be, fathers. Well, okay. Anyway, we don't want to get onto that track. But the point is, now Eve has the ability to give life. So she has babies. Well, here's the thing, Sean. When you were born, your mama gave you a name. She gifted it to you. Gifted and gave you a name. So you have a first and a middle name. Is that correct?
Correct.
What is it?
Sean Andrew.
So get the picture here. Sovereignty comes from God to man. Man can't do anything with it. He has to have woman. God creates woman for man. That partnership creates the next child. Sovereignty goes from God to man through the woman, through the placenta. The placenta is the evidence of the estate trust of that child's sovereignty. But what happens? That child then is delivered. And what do? Do they have a full-term delivery where the baby and the umbilical cord comes out and the placenta comes out? Supposed to. That's what the medical encyclopedia tells us is full-term delivery. And yet, what is an abortion? When you kill the what?
The fetus?
The child.
The child?
Yeah. So, what does the doctor do? And Sean, do you have kids?
I have 3.
Were you there when they were born?
Yes.
Did the attendant or the nurse or the doctor hand you the scissors and say, hey, would you like to do the honors?
Yes.
You created an artificial abortion. That child is now considered to be artificially dead. And why do I say artificial? Because they take the live birth record, that piece of paper, and they put your wife's name in her maiden name. She signs it, you don't. Your name ends up on it, but you don't sign it. So what is a woman who puts down her maiden name and says, hey, I've just given birth, but there's no father signing? Well, that's called a bastard. And so in what ends up happening next is the technical term parens patri, ownership to the father, ownership to the Pope. And were your kids born in a hospital?
Yes.
On a maternity something or other? What do they call it? A maternity what?
Ward.
And so when she signs that document, she's giving up custody of that child to the province or the state. That child now becomes a ward of the province or the state through commercial fraud. And that act is what you did. But nobody told you, nobody instructed you, nobody gave you any legal training. And the commercial fraud goes on and on and on. So because of the artificial abortion, you now have to have an artificial name. And your mama didn't, I'm sorry, what was the name again? Sean what?
Andrew.
Sean Andrew. Your mama didn't say Sean Andrew Newman to the attendant or the nurse or the doctor. She just said Sean Newman. When that nurse or attendant came over and said, oh, what was your mom's name?
My mom's name? Elaine.
And they come over and they say, oh, Elaine, what a beautiful bouncing baby boy. Oh, this is wonderful. What are you going to name him? Well, she says Sean Andrew. And the attendant or nurse goes over and they write it down on paper. But here's the reality of what happens. That paper belongs to the child. Because there's a word that's spelled ENDOCTRINE. endwned. And most people would pronounce that endowed. But it's a mispronunciation. Just like everything else in the legal system, they get us commercially fraudulently confused in the language of the dead, in the verbal alchemy, and that is actually end-owed. The child is end-owed something. So when you become age of majority in Alberta, that's typically the age of 18, you are owed something at the end of minority, at the beginning of majority. And what are you owed? You're owed your estate. And if you'd like to see the proof of that, go back all the way to the British legislation called the Socratic Act of the year 1666. And that's when King Charles II got together in collusion behind the doors of Westminster at the House of Lords with Pope Alexander VII. And they came up with this saying, well, you know what? The bubonic plague came through in 1661, killed tens of millions of people across Britain and Europe. We don't know who's dead or alive. And then they had the Great Fire of London in 1665. They didn't know who was alive or dead. So they said, just like what King Henry VIII said in 1540, we'll administer your estate. So unless you come and tell us you're alive and give us proof of life, we'll administer your estate. And by the way, you're dead and lost at sea. You've probably heard that term before. That's where that comes from. That idea of maritime law, the law of water, lex mercatoria, mercortia. The idea of this law of the merchant comes from the act of cutting the umbilical cord. Now, the technical term for where the umbilical cord falls off on every single human body, we call it the belly button, but it's actually, the technical term is umbilicus. But there's another term for it. It's called the navel, another nautical term, a term of navigation, because everything in this world has been indoctrinated into us from their set of corrupted laws in the legal system. And the legal system is not there to protect you. It's there so you can serve it and feed it. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix and Morpheus holds up a battery and shows the character Neo, he says, that's all we are to them. We're feeding the system. So unless you show up and say, hey, proof of life, well, you can look at it. Look at chapter 4 of the Socratic Act of 1666. It says it right there. If the supposed dead man proved to be alive, his title is revested. Action for mean profits with interest. Well, okay, where do you go to find the source material to show them that you're alive? So when we were kids, or I'm sure you were watching videotapes or VHS or Betamax, and you watch a Disney show or some cartoons or some movie with your parents or friends. When you put that tape in to that machine and it goes down and it has that 12 flashing that nobody seems to be able to change, you start to see this movie. But before the movie starts, before the music rolls, before you see the credits, you get to see the FBI warning that says 5 years imprisonment and $250,000 fine. For what?
For creating for distributing it without permission or something along that lines.
Copyright infringement.
Thank you.
So wait a minute. In their law, in their dead system, in the ink and paper legal administrative process, copyright infringement is really serious? Well, Sean, if you and I decided to start an athletic company and start selling shoes and jogging pants and caps and stuff for athletic wear, etc., and we called the company Nike, how long would we last in business until somebody came along and sued us?
12 hours, maybe less.
Because copyright infringement in their system is really, really serious. So instead of talking about common law to these people, which is about bone and breath and blood, and talking like what God did, let there be light, like your mama did, Sean Andrew, the system, the dead system, can't hear you. Everything that we interact with has to be on ink, on paper with this system. So what would happen if you went to the Canadian Intellectual Property Office paid the Canadian government $63 and copywrote the all capital name, the Capitis de Minutio Maxima name that's connected to your birth certificate number. And now that in 7 minutes, you have a document from them saying, congratulations, Sean Andrew Newman. You are the proud owner, acknowledged and recognized by the Canadian government as the owner and author of the all capital name that we stole from you at birth. You want to go to source material? Let's do another session. I'll drive to Lloydminster. I'll walk you through 12 hours of everything I've done. I put together this.
Says lawfare. Winning the silent war that you didn't even know you were fighting.
And you notice it's me and a dragon and me in my suit of armor, and I got nothing on the backside. Now, the significance of the dragon goes all the way back to the story of St. George on the flag of the Celtic people prior to the Romans showing up. And their flag had the dragon on it. Why did it have the dragon? Well, because out of the mists of time, you have a character that's been mythologicalized, and the legends and the stories and the blah, 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 of King Arthur of Camelot. But King Arthur, Pendragon, that is a real guy, real history. Arthur, Pendragon, Pen being the Latin for head of all the dragons. And the dragons to the Celts, in every single culture in the planet, always had a dragon, always had the serpent. And the serpent represented sovereignty. So when they come along and the Catholic Church says, we got to kill this idea of sovereignty in the people, or we're dead, we'll never have all the wealth and the land and everything else and the stature and the prestige, if we don't get rid of people thinking that they can be sovereign. And so on the British flag, you have all this iconography and symbology of St. George killing the dragon, killing the sovereign people. And it just goes on and on and on. And so once you understand the framework, the outside perimeter, you can start building that picture puzzle of the inside. I'm sure as a kid or a young man or a young husband at Christmas time or Easter time, families get together, they have the turkey or the ham, and we're so full. Yeah, let's go watch some football or whatever. And sometimes they clear the dining room table and they take a picture puzzle and they dump all the pieces and they start doing a puzzle, right?
My father loves a good puzzle. Yes.
So what were the first pieces that he would find?
I would assume maybe somebody's different. Usually the outside. You usually put together the frame of it.
Right. Because it's easy to find that piece. It's a straight edge. So you start with the edge, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this idea of sovereignty, everybody's trying to build the freaking picture. Stop it. That's distraction. It'll never get you anywhere. You can't build the picture puzzle without first putting the frame around it. The framework and the context are paramount. Little boy comes into his father, who just got home from a long, grueling day of work, and he tugs on his shirt sleeve, says, Daddy, play with me, play with me. And the dad just wants to sit back and read his newspaper. He says, just give me a minute. I'm just going to read my paper. Just leave me alone for a few minutes. 5 minutes later, the little boy's there. Daddy, tugging on the shirt. Play with me, play with me. He says, no, little Johnny, I told you I'll come and I'll play with you in a bit. 5 minutes later, there's Johnny. Hey, play with me, Daddy. Come play with me. And the dad, grabs the financial section of the newspaper, goes over to the dining room table, takes out one of the pictures, and there's a picture of hang on a second here. I need a glass of water. I should text my wife and tell her to bring me up one.
You want to grab a glass of water? You can. We can pause.
Yeah, you sure?
Yeah.
All right. Let's put that on pause for 1 second. I got to go clear my throat and get a water. I'll be right back.
Okay, carry on.
So the dad takes the newspaper of the financial section and there is a picture on it, and he cuts that picture all up into puzzle pieces. And he says, little Johnny, when you put this puzzle together, I'll come and play with you. Goes back down, he thinks he's real smart, and he gets his newspaper, he starts reading, and 5 minutes later, little Johnny comes back and says, Daddy, I'm finished. And he looks at him, he goes, there's no way you could be finished. So the dad gets up, and he goes over to the dining room table, and he looks at it, and sure enough, the puzzle's done. And he says, how did you do this? And he said, well, Daddy, when you cut the puzzle pieces up, there was a man on the other side. And so when I put the man together, the world came together. You see, so when we put the man together, the world makes sense. But if you go from the outside in, you'll never put the puzzle pieces together. You have to have the frame. Just like a coin. A coin has three sides, heads, tails, and the edge. So the work I do with the dragon work of lawfare is the edge. And that edge, you don't need to become a lawyer. You just need to go to the source material of the law. Well, where did they get it from? They got it from the book of Judges and Leviticus in the Old Testament. And that source material has been now corrupted. And that's what we call the legal system. That matrix that has us duped in commercial fraud, that we can then say, hey, wait a minute, I don't consent. And if you take a look at Canadian Supreme Court rulings, they have a ruling out. It says consent must be informed. Well, if you weren't informed, then no obligation exists. But you see, people don't read. They're more interested in seeing the Blue Jays in Game 7 take a win. Not that there's anything wrong with baseball, but the point is, you have a choice. You can choose to take a small step and do what the law requires under their system using their words, their rules, and their paperwork. Otherwise, you'll be lost forever trying to scream and shout and stomp your feet and gnash your teeth saying common law, common law, common law. And you'll probably end up losing everything and being thrown in jail. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't that happen to Tamara Leach and Chris Barber? See, they didn't do it the system's way. You go to a cemetery or a graveyard, Sean, you're going to see headstones of dead people. And on those headstones, it has their all caps name from their last name on that headstone. Smith, Rogers, Burley, Newman. It's always in capitals. Why? Because they're dead. So you take a look at any corporation, it's always in capitals. Capitis diminutio maxima, complete loss of status. There are two, creditor status and debtor status. So if I ask you the question, just if you don't mind, play along, Sean, because the answer is in the question I'm going to ask. And here's the question. If you're a creditor, what do creditors create?
Debt?
Credit.
Credit.
Creditors.
I'm
create
failing.
credit.
Great. Thank you for
Okay.
putting me on the spot for that one.
That's okay. I'll put you on the spot here we go again. How does a creditor create credit? When you go to a mortgage or try to get a credit card, or you're going for a home equity line of credit or a business loan, what do they always make you do? Here's the piece of paper. Sign here.
Yes.
So why do they need the living to create a signature that creates credit? And they'll never tell you this, but when you pay back on a mortgage or a credit card, you are buying back your credit over time, but they'll never tell you that. But that's how the system works. We want the evidence for that. Go to the source material. Where is it, Rick? Well, it's the Bills of Exchange Act, originally written in 1885, and the Bank of Canada Act. Okay, so they're interpreted with that law dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary interprets every single word. And here's the thing. I have never met a person who has ever said, you know what, Rick, when I went to the bank and I signed that signature card, and they had that 14 pages of,
Yes.
page after page of technical terms and conditions, right? I've never met anybody who's actually read it.
Okay. You'll have to forgive me here for a second, because you have rattled off 500 things, right? I've got a sheet just full of stuff. So you make the example of a picture and trying to put that picture together, and you build the frame. And I have often said on this show, at times I feel like I'm trying to put together a picture, and every once in a while a puzzle piece just goes in. You're like, oh, that makes sense. But I have no idea if this is a 10,000 piece puzzle or a 100,000 piece puzzle, right? So like you just and it's like I don't even know what the image is. I don't even know what I'm trying. Like I know it's a puzzle, but after that I'm like, I feel blind, if you would. So I was about to ask what's the edge, and you said lawfare is the edge. Okay, fair enough. Lawfare is the edge. All right, got a nice little drawing here for myself, and lawfare is the edge. Done. Then you said God gave man dominion. You said it's me, the living soul, common law, land-based. You rattled off, put the man together. And then you gave a whole bunch of examples of how they've changed things. Okay, fair. Although I am concerned about how they change things, I'm actually more interested in getting to the answer, getting to how you start to put together the picture frame. Lawfare is the edge. Fair enough. So what you're saying is you need to go read the source code, which is you mentioned a bunch of the books in the Old Testament. Am I even remotely close to starting to build the picture frame that you're talking about?
Yes.
So then what would you add into what I said for people who are sitting there trying to keep up? Or they're sitting there going, holy mac, I'm going to have to go back and slow this down a couple times. Because the examples, although are important, it's like, yeah, I get it, we're screwed. Like, we're not screwed in the sense we can't do anything. I get it. We're all watching it play out in real time.
Yep.
And we can keep going over all the examples, which are important to show how words work, the verbal alchemy. But I'm like, all right, Rick, give me the solutions. You can't walk in and do it for Sean, but you can provide guidance to Sean so that he can start looking into it and start understanding it so that he becomes the living soul that is not easily trifled with.
Well, you already are the living soul.
Correct.
But you haven't told anybody that. So in the legal system, you have to provide them with notices. For example, the CRA or Service Canada sends every taxpayer a notice of assessment. If you see somebody who's being evicted, it has a big sign on the door. It says, notice of eviction. If you have ever been in a court of law when the judge says to you, well, are you guilty? How do you plead? Whatever. And you say, well, I'm not guilty. And you start to explain things. And he says, well, did you make any notes? And you say, well, no. And he says, he calls up the officer or the policeman that gave you a ticket. And here's the officer. He takes out his little pad. He says, well, Your Honor, I noticed it was this day, and I noticed it was this license plate, and I noticed this man, he had a goatee and he was bald. He had a blue sweater on, and it was a black vehicle, and he was speeding, and he didn't have a seatbelt on. And Your Honor, I noticed this and I noticed that. Wait a minute. So you're telling me that notices are important? Yeah. So if you don't notice the corporation, if you don't notice the powers that be, through writing, you can't do it verbally because they can't hear you. They're dead. Lawyers don't know the law. They know procedure. So you were talking about in the court of Moses, the court of the Pharaoh, Ramses II, Moses was doing things that their guys couldn't. Well, those guys were not considered to be magicians. They were magisters. Well, guess who sits on the court of King's Bench right now? A magister, an elected guy who doesn't even need to be a lawyer. Did you know that?
I had heard that.
So they're magisters, they're magicians, they're word magicians. And so every single thing that's done is done to confuse you. In fact, you've probably heard the old tired cliche of when they ask you, do you understand me? They're not asking if you comprehend, they're asking if you stand under their authority. So to start off with, let me draw your attention to the idea that when a man picks up a weapon, it could be just a baseball bat or a stick, and he goes and hits somebody else, that escalates until you have warfare, similar to what we had with 1938 with Hitler going into Poland. He weaponized the nation and went in and caused destruction. And you're familiar with that, true?
True.
Okay, so that's warfare. Well, what the heck is lawfare? Well, lawfare is when they weaponize the legal system against the individual in order to penalize that individual or group of people in order to feed the system. In other words, you can feed the system one of two ways. You can create a whole lot of fear so that nobody else does it, what Tamara Litch and Chris Barber and the truckers did in Ottawa, or you can do another thing, you can debank them, which happened as well. I have a client by the name of Tony Olnick. He knows all this. Do you think he took any action and did any of the paperwork? No, he'd rather stand up on top of the roof with a bullhorn and get arrested and, suffer the consequences because he didn't pay attention. And if you don't pay attention, you pay the consequence. Which one do you want to pay?
Pay attention.
Okay. So if where it starts, the answer is not lawfare, F-A-R-E, it's lawfare, L-A-W-F-A-I-R. And so the process is extremely simple because it's all paperwork. And Sean, whose paperwork is it that we're going to use?
I assume theirs?
Yeah. Whose rules do you think we're going to follow?
Probably theirs.
Whose words are we going to use?
Theirs.
So if you do it their way, what can they say?
Nothing, because you're using their rules against them.
Their rules, their words, and their paperwork. And here's a little saying, and I'm sure you could fill in the blank for me. So I'll say it, you fill in the blank. And I promise you're not going to get this one wrong, okay? If you can't beat them,
join them.
Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean become corrupt and create fraud and do all sorts of vile things. But the idea is if talking the law of God doesn't work to them, if talking common law blood and breath and bone doesn't work, then the only other alternative is to do it their way. So file your copyrights. Create a copyright notice of liability and say to them, hey, you know what? You sent me something with my all caps name that appears on my CRA service credit union or my banking, my taxation, my property tax, my mortgage, my credit cards, whatever. And you're using an all caps name. I own the copyright. Cease and desist or I'll sue you for $10 million. Well, don't people sue each other all the time?
Yes.
Don't they need evidence to do that?
Correct. Oh, no, actually, no, they don't.
No, they do. Otherwise, it's considered to be an organized, pseudological, commercial argument, and it gets thrown out of court, and you can spend time in jail and get heavy fines.
Okay, so yes, they do.
What they call OPCA. So you can't use common law or God's law. And let's just talk about the God's law. That's 10 commandments, basically. The first 6 commandments in the 10 commandments are all about our relationship to God. The last 4 are all about our relationship to others. But here's how you can distill those last 4. Do no harm. Don't kill anybody. Don't damage their body. Don't take their stuff, and don't damage their stuff. So as long as you're not doing any harm, and yet somebody comes along and says, hey, you broke the contract, you broke the law, there's going to be a penalty. In their system, every single penalty in their legal system has a remedy. So the question I get asked all the time at the seminars I do, and when I get invited to speak somewhere, they say, well, is there a remedy? Absolutely, there's a remedy. It's already written. They have it, but they'll never invoke it for you. You have to evoke and invoke equity. And equity is not looking for a victory. Equity is looking for balance.
Rick, you showed your book earlier. I'm going to assume you walk through a bunch of this in that book, yes?
Yes.
Where can people find said book?
Well, that book is my 41 years in the legal system and the brotherhood of the boys in blue corruption, as well as the real world, boots on the ground, and then working with the motivational group of Peak Performance, and then having my own business as a coach. And then when I tried to retire, I had an art gallery in Calgary, and in 2013, we got flooded out. And quick story, in 2010, one of my salesmen came to me and said, Rick, you got to buy this thing called Bitcoin. And I said, well, what is it? He goes, well, it's a virtual currency. And I said, a what? He said, a virtual currency. And I said, you mean it doesn't really exist? And he goes, that's right. And I said, well, how much is it? He said, well, it's August of 2010, Rick. It's about 6 cents a coin. And I said, okay, and what can I do with it? He said, well, you just hold on to it because someday it could be worth $1. And I said, the guy was an ex-Marine, great guy. Brad Monson is his name. Known him for ton time. He's living down in New Mexico now. Go down there and visit him, and it's it's a blast. Guy's got tons of stories about the Navy. Anyway, he says, yeah, you should throw some cash at this. And I said, well, wait a minute. So if it doesn't exist and it might be worth something someday, Brad, are you just asking me for like $500 or $1,000? Do you just need me to give you like some cash? And he goes, no. I want to take you down to 17th Avenue in Calgary. There's a coffee shop. They do this. They put it online. You give them the money. They do the exchange, and they send you an email code because they didn't have smartphones back then in 2010. So he takes me down there. We get to the coffee shop. We're having a latte, sitting there talking shop with these guys, and they're explaining what this thing is, and it's all algorithms and computer code, and right over my head. I wasn't paying attention to that, Sean, but Brad said I should do it, so I put $500 in and bought $500 worth of Bitcoin at 6 cents. Okay, now what? Well, I went back. We do our art gallery thing. Opened the doors in 2007. Theron Fleury was one of our first customers. The hockey player from Calgary. I know you're probably an Edmonton Oilers fan, but Theron came by.
It's hard not to know who Theron is. He played for Team Canada, and we all rooted for him. And that was, and he's been on the show. He's been on the show before.
And he had a flooring company, concrete type company. He did the art gallery floor for us, and we gave him a deal on the art. He bought a huge package of art, and Brad, everybody was happy, and it was like pretty good press for us. But here we have, focusing on our art gallery, and we bring in people. They do seminars. We host them. It was all great, and then. All of the information for that Bitcoin was on our servers. And then, we're right on 11th Avenue. And you know how in Calgary, where you come out of downtown on McLeod Trail South, you go under the train bridge, and they've got the big propane tank on the left-hand side there. Worley Parsons used to be on the right-hand side. Well, that was our building, the old Canadian, the Imperial Tobacco Warehouse. And we had condos above and the gallery, and we had turned it into condos and stuff. Anyway, I get a call from my business partner at 2 a.m. He says, get your butt down here. We got to move the art. We're flooding. This is the great flood of 2013. Get down there about half an hour later, and just a mess. It's like 4 feet of water on all the walls. We're trying to move the art, and thank goodness we had the storage of the art upstairs in the second floor, so we have to carry it like this through the water. But, Sean, have you ever seen a piece of electrical equipment hit water?
I mean, in a movie, sure, but in like real life, no.
Well, it's like in the movie. It's not quite as spectacular, but everything shorts out and it gets fried. So those servers were in the water, in 4 feet of water. It took, at the time, when we got everything cleaned up, I realized, okay, well, wait a minute. All of a sudden, that next year, Bitcoin hit quite a phenomenal price. And I was like, I think I have some of that. So we went back and tried to clean up the hard drives. But if you've ever seen a pizza and it has a slice missing, that's what my hard drives look like. We spent the next 18 months trying to forensically rebuild them, and we couldn't. 8,333 Bitcoin. Gone.
You've never
You know
been
what
able
that's
to.
worth?
You've never been able to get them back.
Nope. Trust me, we've tried. When you have 8,300 of anything that's valued at whatever, that's a lot of value. So the lesson, I'm now paying attention to the blockchain. Anyway, long story short, sorry to bore you, but
You're not boring
the
me.
idea here, we ended up losing. I lost probably $6 or $7 million in that. Two of the houses that I had across from the Elbow River got flooded out just on the other side of the bridge on 4th Street in Mission in Calgary, just south of the Safeway there, and everything was considered to be an act of God. So the insurance company didn't pay, and so since 2013, I've been. I came back to doing coaching and talking to people about how to correct their status and put the paperwork together in order to correct their status, to get them out of thinking that they are the voluntary indentured debt slave of the debtor, and to actually establish themselves through the proper paperwork to become the creditor under the Bills of Exchange Act, as it's interpreted by the Black's Law Dictionary, as well as the Bank of Canada Act.
So I brought up book. You tell me a story of how you got back to, I'm just paraphrasing, how you got back to being a coach. So how do people then, if they're interested in this, Rick, what I'm trying to get to is how do they find it? Do they come to you then? Do they read your book? Do they read your book and then have the opportunity to hire you as a coach? I guess I hear the possibility and maybe more the probability of solutions. How do they get into the solutions? Just saying lawfare is the edge of my picture frame. I can go read, but it sounds like instead of me taking this winding road where I'm like, what the hell am I doing? You're going, no, it's a straight road. Just come over here and go straight. And I'm trying to say, okay, so where's the straight road? Rick, where's the straight road?
The straight road is built into the legal system itself. Every statutory code and every contract law rule is in black and white, but it's in legalese. So years and years and years ago, after the flood, I started working with a fellow out of Utah by the name of David Lester Straight. And everything that we were being taught or learning layered into all the synchronicities of my life, from law and the police and street level stuff, working in the real world. And so every application I found was American. But that's what I did here, as I took everything from that to put together, for me, the straight road, the edge. But that material is something nobody will read and actually take action on. But what they can take action on is if I sit with them for, say, 30, 40 minutes, like this, online, we can do a share screen. I can take them exactly to the Canadian Intellectual Property Office site. I can show them how to fill out their copyright documents and do their copyrights, and then do a copyright notice of liability. And those notices are the legal system's paperwork. But if you don't write it correctly, then they won't accept it as a notice. So you have to do it the right way, and that's why the coaching and the mentoring is layer by layer, because people get distracted. No disrespect intended to anybody, but life happens. That's why life is iffy. That's the middle letters of the word life. So over time, there's a learning curve. And in that learning curve, they learn how to become their own attorney in fact. And so in Canada, we have the Personal Property Security Act, and every province is different. And you've probably seen the word in the Americas where they say, we the people, and we have unalienable rights. You've probably heard that before, right? Well, that's a mispronunciation. It's not unalienable. It's unalienable. The human living soul cannot have a lien put on them. The only thing you can put a lien on is property, or a house, or a barn, or a piece of property, or car. Because those things are inanimate. They are dead. They are just represented by ink on paper. Similar to your driver's license, your credit cards, your birth certificate, your SIN number, your mortgage documents, etc. All of those things, Sean, are in the all capital name. That is not you. That is under their law. Those all caps name reflect the dead guy. You and I, as living souls, can't own anything, because every time that we purchase something, it's done in the dead guy's name. So where did they get the name? Because your signature and your consent is not on that birth certificate or that SIN number, is it? It's not. So whose signatures are on that? Well, the people that created them. And so one of the legal maxims of law is that he who creates is responsible. All right, so let's create some documents. Let's create responsibility under the idea of your own authority and act like a sovereign.
Dumb question. Probably not a dumb question, but I remember, and forgive me, folks, I can't remember who it was. I had this guy on probably 2 years ago. I want to say that he was talking about common law and how you didn't need insurance on a vehicle. And if you got pulled over by the cops, you had to jump through all these different things. And I remember people being interested in it, but I also remember thinking, in order to go down that road, he had to spend time in jail and all the things. I'm like, who wants to go through jail time, being harassed by the criminal system or the system that is, for not running plates and insurance and all the things? When I hear you talk, I'm like, it feels like it's similar but very different in the fact that what you're doing is everything by their rules and using them against themselves. So if you do this, I assume it's not like all of a sudden the CISA shows up on your front doorstep, says you can't do that. You're coming with us. Or, I don't know, fines, court dates, all the things. Because I assume the system would want to be like, oh, no, you're not doing this. We see where you're going here. But if you do the right steps, like, what are the ramifications of going down this road, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to.
The ramifications are clearly printed out on an American dollar bill, and you can probably fill in the blank. And let's see if I can put you on the spot again. Are you willing to play?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's
Okay.
let's play this game. It's Sean's least favorite game on this show, where I have to guess. Carry on.
All right. So on an American dollar bill, it says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and
private.
Correct.
Oh, man.
So that sounds to me like a ledger entry, doesn't it?
Okay.
So which side of the ledger are you on? Are you on the public side, responsible for all the debts and obligations of the public that the government spends its money on? Or are you living in the private, like the 13 bloodline families that trace their heritage all the way back to the pharaohs, like the Aldebarans, the Medicis? Because you never hear about those people. Oh, sure, you hear about the billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Trump, but that's entirely different. They're not the rich ones. You might even think of Rockefeller or Rothschild. They're not even the rich ones. The ones behind the curtain that are pulling the strings are the ones you never hear about. And so if you and I had devised a system where we're making trillions of dollars a year, would you want anybody to know? I'm going to hallucinate because I hate guessing. I'm going to hallucinate that you don't want that to happen. So you'll do everything in your power to make sure that the laws, the legal system, is just so. So in the statutory codes and the contracts, there are three very important things. Under contract law, you need 5 or 6 things to have a legally enforceable and binding contract. The first of which is terms and conditions, which nobody reads. The second thing is you have to have 2 signatures. So if somebody says, hey, I'll do this for you and it'll cost you this much money, the guy goes, okay, I agree. You sign the paper. Well, now you have 2 signatures. You have party of the first part and party of the second part. So now you got to perform, right? Well, what happens if you don't perform? Are there penalties?
If they're in there, then yes.
All right. So if there are penalties in the statutory code system of what used to be called Alberta Supreme Court, which is no longer Alberta Supreme Court, it's now called Alberta Court of Appeals. And under Canadian Supreme Court case decisions, going all the way back to the beginning of Canada, which is another long story, which is probably a different show. But there was no confederation, by the way.
If I simplify this, what you're saying is the most powerful families in the world do this, and we just don't know it. And they probably don't want us to know it, which means you worry about, or I ask about, like ramifications, and you go, well, it's already being done. You're just going to use their template, thank you, to do the same thing. And they don't want, they don't want anybody.
Let's break it down even further to simplicity. When you use their template, you end up living in the private, and now you operate invisibly. Rather than being in the public, where everybody can see it. I mean, your audience is probably very familiar, if they're around, our age or older or my age, that phone books, the white pages. And at the beginning of the white pages years ago, there were blue pages. And the blue pages were all listing of the what? What departments and divisions?
I actually don't remember.
The government. All the government offices were listed in the blue pages. So riddle me this, Batman. Why was the CRA and the Bank of Canada not in the government blue pages? Answer: because they're not government agencies, in the same way that the IRS and the Federal Reserve are not part of Congress or the United States government.
So you're pointing out the fact there is a way so that you operate outside the blue or white pages.
What I'm saying is that the template already exists,
right,
and that nobody's teaching it.
Well, you're teaching it. If somebody's interested in finding out more, Rick, where do they go to find a way to enlist your services?
I have a Proton encrypted email server. Oftentimes I'll use Gmail if it's not that big of a deal. But when I do my seminars or I get invited to speak somewhere, I'll give out the burleyrick@protonmail.com address.
So if somebody's listening to this, that's where I would direct them. burleyrick@proton.mail.
Sure.
Or burleyrick@proton.mail.com, or whatever it is.
When Morley saw my straw man, and by the way, we didn't even talk about that, but I have a friend named Clint Richardson who wrote this book.
Straw Man, the real story of your artificial person.
And it's rather in depth.
Yes. It looks like a big old textbook.
But it has everything in here, but who's going to read that? I have...
well, there will be people. You're a unique individual that reads, right? And reads all the way back to source documents, right? There are people listening to this that it's the reason why I keep asking. I'm like, okay, so how do they've been listening for 2 hours. They're sitting here and they're going, yeah, Rick, you got me sold. How do I find out more about this? And that's what I keep coming back to, right? No matter how long I talk to you, if people are interested in this, Rick's not going to give you, here it is. Here's your card. You're now free of the system. You have to go do the work. So then I go,
hang on a second. Okay. I get this question all the time. Free of the system? No. You're not part of the system right now. The dead guy is. That guy. The straw man. The agent in commerce. Technically, that term in law is transmitting utility. Goes all the way back to 3,700 years ago in the Roman civic law courts called Straminius Homo. Then we're still under that Roman civic law. That's how everything operates right now, because there is no de jure lawful legal system. It's all de jure. It's all based on their, and understand, we talked about copyright, right? The legal system owns the copyright of the legal system. So if you mess with it, you're going to jail. If you mess with it, you're going to pay a heavy fine. If you mess with it, CSIS shows up on your door and says, come with us. You can't mess with it. It's their copyright. So use their words, rules, and paperwork and go invisible. But you're not being taken out of a system. I had a guy who was in the Navy in Canada, went to Afghanistan. Great guy from Quebec. He says, I'll never go back. He may visit. But he says, I hurt my arms and now I'm on pension, Rick. If I do this, do I lose my pension? I said, are you getting the pension? Does it come in your lowercase name? And he said, I don't know. Let me look. So he gets his papers and he goes, no, it comes to the all caps name. And I said, oh, so you don't get it. He said, well, when I go to the hospital or to a medical clinic, they ask for my Alberta healthcare card. Oh, you mean you don't just walk in and get free healthcare in Alberta? You got to show a card? Yeah, because it's got a registration number on it. Your driver's license has a registration number. The interesting word about registration is Latin. It means Regis Istrata. I'm sure you've bought property before or know somebody who has. And when the mortgage moves over, it moves over at the same time as long as conditions are taken off of the contract. That title, the strata, the distance between the strata title and the ownership of goes from one guy who's selling to the guy who's buying. The title has to land first. So Regis Istrata is the king's ownership, the transference of title. So the idea here is not to try to find a loophole or cut corners or, do something that's underhanded. Learn the freaking template.
I'm trying to draw people to reading the template. And I'm trying to draw them, I assume, to you. Because I think people will be, okay, this sounds very intriguing. I want to learn more. You have a book. You have coaching. That's where I should point them towards. Correct?
If they have an interest in this, then yes. I mean, remember, take the red pill, you see how deep the rabbit hole goes. If you take the blue pill, you go back to sleep and believe whatever you want. But just remember that the word belief contains the word lie. So beliefs are never as powerful as knowledge. The experiential knowledge you gained from working with a career coach, you said, well, I don't think I'd ever look back. But the point is you worked through it for you. Everybody's situation and circumstance are different. All I'm showing is, look, there's the evidence. There's the data, facts, and information. There's the template. Let's follow the template. Do your copyrights. Get your notices written. Get your contract with the all caps dead guy signed. Get a hold harmless indemnity policy. Get your power of attorney document. Do your declaration of political status. File your Personal Property Security Act in Alberta. After you've done your UCC1 in New York State. And those things put into the public record, the all caps name is mine. I've taken copyright of it. And that is the debtor. The all caps name is the debtor, the dead guy. the guy who can't do anything. He can't sign anything. Your driver's license can't sign anything. Your social insurance card can't sign anything. And I am the living soul. I am the lowercase man. I am the man who signs. I create the credit. And you put that into the public record. And that package, that what we call the express trust, basically is the mirror image of a irrevocable private contract trust that protects your assets, which we also do, which is private. And the whole point of CRA not being in, or Bank of Canada being not in the government blue pages, is because they're private. They've never done an audit publicly, and yet every public company has to do a public audit and publish it. CRA don't. Neither does Bank of Canada. So if you have an entity and you put it into the trust, that trust has a holding company, and the trust owns 100% of the shares of the holding company, and a holding company isn't taxed. Why not? Because it's a holding company. It doesn't create revenue. It's not in business. So you put your assets into the holding company. The trust then owns 100% of the assets, and now you are no longer the dead guy voluntarily consenting to pay the debts and obligations of the public. Is it a learning curve? Yes, it is. Was it a learning curve in the oil industry that when you were in the oil industry, you had to start somewhere and somebody had to say, well, this is how you pull a wrench. This is how you attach a valve. There's a learning curve in everything. And so is that being taught? Is anybody being taught how to protect their families or their life or their wealth or their livelihoods? No. In fact, you see the opposite happening. And Sean, there is a great reckoning coming. And it's coming like a frickin' freight train, and it's no longer at the end of the tunnel. It's right here in front of us. And so the call to action, the mission, the passion and purpose I have. I mean, some people say, hey, Rick, you really ought to try and ramp up your energy a little bit because this is kind of boring stuff. And they laugh and wink and ha, ha, ha. But I am passionate about this. I've spent 41 years as an adult dealing with all this stuff and seeing horrible, horrible circumstances and outcomes and results because people didn't pay attention. So when you start the learning curve, you start the process, a journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first step. And John, the destination is not really the point because we're only on this earth for a short time. We don't know when that date goes on the headstone. What I'm interested in is the dash. I was born in this year, dash, died this year, headstone. I don't know what that end date is. I know where the beginning was, and I know where I am right now, the dash. That's what I'm interested in people's lives. That's the context I want to hear. Because then I can ask some questions to those people, and they can then own it, and then they can take action on it. But you can't take action on something that you don't own.
I really appreciate you coming on. My brain,
it's been fun.
I'm like,
thank you.
I'm like, I sit here and I'm listening. I'm like, I'm having this like surreal experience of sitting here, folks, where I feel like I was just saying this with Dave Collum, where if Sean was sitting here 5 years ago and listened to the conversation with Dave Collum, he would have been like, the hell are you two talking about? Right? I'm just talking about sports. And here I sit and I'm listening to you and I'm like, I feel like you're talking 1,000 miles an hour. And I'm like, some of it I don't understand. And I don't know how much, we could sit here for 12 hours and I still don't understand some of it. But in saying that, it's like, well, that doesn't mean you have to understand it all today. It's like,
that's right.
It's you use a walking metaphor. I use the biking metaphor because we biked across Canada in 06, and how do you bike across the country? You get on the pedals and you start pushing. And you'll be shocked if you do that, how far you go. And day after day, all of a sudden you're across the country. And so I appreciate you coming on. And I'll be very curious to hear what people have to say after they hear this episode. And please feel free to text or to comment. And Rick, I just appreciate you hopping on and doing this.
Well, it's been great to be here, and I always enjoy the questioning. And there's not a question that I don't. There's not a question I fear, and I'm grateful and appreciative. So, thank you very much, Sean Andrew Newman.
Thank you, sir.